The board has not served a, quote, watchdog, end quote, function. As the Rockefeller Commission noted, the board does not exercise control over the CIA, which is, in fact, the board's only source of information about the agency activities. When the board has occasionally inquired into areas of possible illegal or improper CIA activity, it has met resistance. For example, when the board became aware of the so-called Huston Plan and asked the FBI and Attorney General for a copy, the request was refused. The board did not pursue the matter with the White House. In 1970, the board was asked by Henry Kissinger, the then president's national security advisor, to examine Allende's election victory in Chile to determine whether the CIA had failed to foresee and propose appropriate actions to prevent Allende's taking office. The board requested 40 committee and NSC, National Security Council, or minutes to determine the facts. Resuming. Its request was refused and its inquiry was dropped. The President needs an independent body to assess the quality and effectiveness of our foreign intelligence effort. In the words of its executive secretary, the board has, quote, looked at intelligence through the eyes of the President, end quote. PFIAB has served, in effect, as an intelligence, quote, kitchen cabinet, end quote. The board has been useful, in part, because its advice and recommendations have been for the President. As such, the executive nature of this relationship should be maintained. Over the years, many of PFIAB's recommendations have been adopted, and others have served as a basis for later reform or reorganization. The board has not been an executive, quote, watchdog, end quote, of the CIA. To make it so would be to place the board in an untenable position. Advisor to the President on the quality and effectiveness of intelligence on the one hand, and, quote, policeman, end quote, of the intelligence community on the other. These two roles conflict and should be performed separately. 4. Intelligence Oversight Board. To assist the President, the NSC, and the Attorney General in overseeing the intelligence community, President Ford has created an Intelligence Oversight Board. The board will consist of 3 private citizens appointed by the President. They will also serve on PFIAB. The board will be, in effect, a community-wide inspector general of last resort. It will review reports from the inspector general and general counsels of the intelligence community and report periodically to the attorney general and the president on any activities which appear to be illegal or improper. The board will also review the practices, procedures, and internal guidelines of the various IGs and general counsels to ensure that they are designed to bring questionable activities to light. Finally, the board will see to it that intelligence community IGs and general counsels have access to any information they require. The President's Intelligence Oversight Board should serve a useful purpose. However, the ability of a small part-time board to monitor the activities of the entire intelligence community is questionable. Further, the board is a creature of the executive and, as such, may be unable or at times unwilling to probe certain sensitive areas. End of page 71, beginning page 72. Body of independent a body independent of the executive must also be responsible for monitoring the activities of the intelligence community, including those which may be either illegal or improper. E. Allocating intelligence resources. 1. Role of OMB. The Office of Management and Budget, OMB, is the principal staff arm of the President for supervising the federal budget. The Office of Management and Budget is also a staff arm for management, a tool the President occasionally uses to reorganize or direct the structure and activities of the federal government. In managing U.S. intelligence activities, the President has used the Office of Management and Budget to pull together his annual intelligence budget and also to monitor the intelligence community's appropriations requests and makes its recommendations to the President for the amounts to be included in his budget. Furthermore, Office of Management and Budget appropriations, footnote 31, CIA's appropriation and has authority to approve releases from the CIA's Contingency Reserve Fund. Pausing the reading. Reading footnote 31, quote, apportionment, end quote, of funds is described by budgetary statutes as the Office of Management and Budget action, following congressional appropriations whereby agencies receive formal notification of amounts appropriated and the distribution of spending by time, period, and program. Resuming the reading. The fiscal management responsibility of OMB has been especially critical in the field of intelligence. Intelligence activities comprise a large part of that small and shrinking portion of the federal budget which is, quote, controllable, end quote, footnote 32. Pausing the reading and reading footnote 32. Defined as spending that is not predetermined by statute, such as interest on the federal debt, veterans benefits, social payments, etc. Resuming the reading. About 75% of federal spending for fiscal 1976 was designated in the President's budget submission as, quote, uncontrollable, end quote. The committee has found that the direct cost of a national intelligence spending is currently, brackets, deleted, end quote, end brackets. And total intelligence spending is approximately twice that. Thus, the total U.S. intelligence budget is about, brackets, deleted, end brackets, percent of federal spending, but is, brackets, deleted, end brackets, percent of controllable federal spending. Because the U.S. intelligence budget is fragmented and concealed, the relationship between controllable intelligence program and controllable federal spending has never been shown to Congress in the President's budget. Office of Management and Budget has been a principal point at which the President can identify and exert management leverage over this aggregate of controllable funds. Over the years, OMB and its predecessor, the Bureau of the Budget, has had the greatest management impact when it has been used as an instrument of presidential reorganization. It has identified major issues for the President, usually involving bids by the intelligence agencies to maintain or launch duplicative or marginally useful programs. For example, in 1960, President Eisenhower commissioned the Budget Bureau to establish a joint study group of the principal intel. End of page 72, beginning of page 73. Legends. Agencies to take a hard look at U.S. intelligence collection requirements and other problems. In its report, the Joint Study Group recommended to the President a variety of measures to strengthen intelligence management, including a more assertive role for the DCI, Director of Central Intelligence, stronger control by the NSA, National Security Agency, of the cryptologic agencies, and centralized management of collection requirements. A decade later, President Nixon commissioned Office of Management and Budget to probe the management of the intelligence community and to determine what changes, short of legislation, might be made. An ensuing report by the Assistant OMB Director, James Schlesinger, I don't know how to pronounce every name, concluded that the division of labor envisaged by the National Security Act of 1947 had been rendered obsolescent and meaningless by technology and the ambitions of U.S. intelligence agencies. The Schlesinger report recommended nothing less than the basic reform of U.S. intelligence management, centering upon a strong Director of Central Intelligence who could bring intelligence costs under control and bring intelligence production to an adequate level of quality and responsiveness. In addition, the Office of Management and Budget report pointed to 9 specific mergers or shifts of intelligence programs estimated to save nearly $1 billion annually. OMB has also been an occasional lightning rod for the identification of specific budget or management issues. In the mid-60s, the Bureau of the Budget called the President's attention to the problems of better coordinating the costs and benefits of overhead reconnaissance. Further, the Bureau pressed hard for a reorganization of defense mapping and chartering activities, emphasizing the issues of needless duplication of service mapping agencies. This was resolved following the Schlesinger report. 2. Recent trends and programs. OMB repeatedly was given a major role in developing the recommendations presented to President Ford for overhauling intelligence budgeting and management. If this was the case, it would reverse a recent trend. Since 1971, OMB's day-to-day influence upon intelligence management has been at a low point. OMB has been confined to its cyclical institutional role in the budget process. The strengths and weaknesses of this role will be discussed below. 3. OMB role in formulating the budget. OMB can always get the President's attention in recommending what should be included in his annual budget proposals to Congress. Associated with OMB budget recommendations is the identification of major resource allocation issues with an analysis of options and a recommended course of action. However, OMB recommendations on intelligence have had less presidential acceptance than in other areas of the federal budget. This has been due to the difficulty of carrying any, quote, military, end quote, budget issue opposed by the Secretary of Defense and relative ineffectiveness of Director of Central Intelligence support. Further, Office of Management and Budget is excluded from some of the early informative stages of Department of Defense program determinations for intelligence, which cover 80% of the intelligence budget. End of page 73, beginning page 74. For the past 3 years, with OMB encouragement, the DCI has provided the President with its own recommendations for the national budget, for the national intelligence budget. Unfortunately, these have come too late in the process to have much impact. These recommendations have followed, not preceded, DoD submissions to OMB and OMB's own formative stages of analysis. The President's annual and 5-year planning targets are an integral part of the federal budget process. Federal agencies are adjured to fit their fiscal and staffing plans with the presidential targets, with special emphasis upon the nearest or, quote, budget, end quote, year. Presidential targets are especially important in their potential for strengthening central management of the intelligence community. The DCI has recognized this. These targets can assist the Director of Central Intelligence in getting more value for the intelligence dollar. However, Office of Management and Budget has issued the planning targets too late in the planning process and without any in-depth coordination of totals and major components with the Director of Central Intelligence. By the time the DCI and CIA have received their target figures in June or July, most of the major decisions on budget request levels and future year implications have already been agreed to within Defense and CIA. This type of problem is widespread in the federal budget process, but because of the insulation of intelligence from external checks and balances, the problem is especially serious in intelligence budgeting. The problem is exacerbated by OBM's issuance to the Department of Defense of a planning target, which has the effect of constituting an alternative planning base for intelligence. This target has not been directly related to DoD's intelligence budget. The Secretary of Defense has been given, in effect, a choice between a level of intelligence spending consistent with the DCI's planning target and one which matches his own view of overall Department of Defense priorities and claims. Not surprisingly, Secretaries of Defense have tended to opt for the latter. The result, therefore, of the two planning targets has made the DCI's management mandate all the harder to fulfill. 4. Presidential budget decision-making. OMB's budget recommendations to the President, which culminate OMB's annual budget review, have been the only comprehensive presentations of United States intelligence spending. These serve to highlight major issues and are done by analysts independent of any intelligence agency. In contrast with the DCI's National Intelligence Budget presentation, which includes future year figures and does not have the Secretary of Defense's recommended amounts, The Office of Management and Budget presentation is complete and based upon each agency's final positions. Moreover, the OMB presentation offers specific solutions to the President's problem of retaining intelligence spending without degrading intelligence operations. These presentations, and those related to the Director of Central Intelligence's National Foreign Intelligence Budget, are not shared with Congress. Therefore, except for selective briefings by the Director of Central Intelligence and individual program managers, Congress has not been informed of the major options at stake in the President's budget. End of page 74, beginning page 75. 5. Apportionment and budget execution. OMB apportionment of appropriated funds is the source of much of OMB's muscle in budget execution. By law 31 U.S.C. 665, federal agencies cannot use appropriated funds in the absence of an Office of Management and Budget appropriation. Apportionment. The apportionment can convey the funds in lump sum, distributed by quarter or by major program. OMB can impose set-asides. OMB can impose set-asides and can call special hearings. With regard to intelligence programs, however, OMB apportionment action is weak and fragmented. The only direct intelligence apportionment by OMB is to CIA, i.e., those earmarked amounts of the Department of Defense appropriation which are transferred from Defense to CIA under authority of the Central Intelligence Agency Act of 1949. This apportionment is done in lump sum. The rest of the intelligence budget is scattered among and apportioned by some 20 DoD appropriations and an appropriation to state without a distinction made for intelligence funds. Thus, OMB apportionment is procedurally applied to less than 20% of the annual national intelligence budget and to less than 10% of total intelligence spending. Another weakness of OMB's ability to monitor budget execution is its procedural blindness to advances, reprogramming, and management of intelligence proprietary activities. Other weaknesses include a large proportion of funds spent for CIA covert action projects have come from Defense Department advances under authority of the Economy Act and therefore are outside Office of Management and Budget appropriation. OMB does not routinely receive notice of major reprogramming of CIA funds from activities shown and justified in the congressional budget. The premium upon exploitation of unforeseen intelligence opportunities puts a premium upon budgeting flexibility. Yet OMB lacks a set of benchmarks to determine routinely when CIA or other intelligence agencies have substantially departed from the approved budget. It appears that more than half of all large-scale covert action projects initiated in the period 1961-76 did not come to OMB for review. 6. Absence of GAO audits. The absence of GAO audits in the intelligence community affects OMB's ability to monitor intelligence performance. In other federal areas, GAO audits often include an evaluation of performance, effectiveness, and economy, as well as compliance. OMB has a standing arrangement to follow up with agencies on GAO audits. GAO audits often provide launching points for OMB investigations or reinforce OMB interests in broader problems. The absence of such independent and critical GAO reports in the intelligence field weakens both OMB and congressional oversight. 7. OMB representation on XCOM. Footnote 33. Pausing the reading footnote 33. This XCOM was abolished as a result of President Ford's recent executive order. It is likely that a similar body will be reestablished under the direction of the new Committee on Foreign Intelligence. Resuming the reading. The process of planning and budget for overhead reconnaissance is new enough to have escaped historic overlaps of jurisdiction afflict. End of page 75, beginning page 76. Afflicting the rest of the intelligence community. An executive committee, XCOM, was established to coordinate reconnaissance development and planning, chaired by the Director of Central Intelligence, with the Assistant Secretary of Defense for Intelligence as the other member. While Office of Management and Budget was not a member of XCOM, it had a representative at XCOM meetings. XCOM decisions often were a compromise between the DCI and the Department of Defense, which may or may not have represented the most cost-effective solution. On occasion, the OMB representative took a role in defining options and insisting upon analysis of key points. Here in one area of intelligence budgeting where OMB was actively represented and therefore in a position to help the President identify and resolve large issues. 8. Net assessment of Office of Management and Budget role in intelligence management. OMB's cyclical role in the budget process has the strengths and weaknesses noted. Recognizing that OMB has statutory authority in budget preparation and apportionment of funds, it is nevertheless true that the key to OMB influence for management improvement is the extent to which the President chooses to use and back OMB for specific projects. OMB's role ought to be at its strongest in the intelligence community, given the absence of public scrutiny and checks and balances which operate in other federal program areas. The committee notes several trends in intelligence budgeting and management which indicate an increasing need for strong and objective OMB staff assistance to the President. First, intelligence spending has increased significantly in the last decade. There are pressures for further growth. Second, as already noted, intelligence is one of the few, quote, controllable, end quote, program areas of a federal budget. Third, with results of intelligence spending do not seem to be commensurate with the increases in outlays. Inflation partly explains this. Since 1969, the real value of goods and services available to intelligence has been reduced by an estimated 20%. Inflation is not a full explanation, however. Rigidities in the intelligence budget protect each manager's share at the cost of perpetuating less productive or duplicative programs. The result is that ceilings on the intelligence budget are permitted to drive out long-term improvements in economy and effectiveness. Fourth, there is a fragmentation of management authority in the intelligence community. The Director of Central Intelligence has had successive presidential mandates to manage, but has been handicapped by the lack of control of intelligence dollars. In the face of such a challenge, the nature of future presidential mandates to OMB, Office of Management and Budget, could be important to both executive and congressional oversight. In any future determination to strengthen OMB's role, it will be necessary to enlarge the staff of six-person OMB intelligence. It will be necessary to enlarge the staff of the six-person OMB intelligence unit. 9. OMB's role as affected by the President's recent executive order. In his recent executive order of February 18th, President Ford strengthened OMB's role in intelligence management in two principal ways. First, OMB has been made an observer to the Operations Advisory Group, successor to the 40 Committee. This step will likely give OMB, end of page 76, beginning page 77, a regular and timely scrutiny of all proposed covert action and other sensitive intelligence projects. OMB's review will, therefore, no longer be confined to a post-decision review of those projects requiring contingency reserve fund financing. Another likely effect is to strengthen the substantive mandate of OMB's inquiry into CIA projects of all kinds. Second, the President has given the Director of Central Intelligence a more direct influence on the national intelligence budget by requiring that the new Committee on Foreign Intelligence, CFI, which is headed by the Director of Central Intelligence, quote, shall control budget preparation and resource allocation for the National Foreign Intelligence Program, end quote. Further, the President requires that the Committee on Foreign Intelligence, quote, shall, prior to submission to the Office of Management and Budget, review and amend as it deems appropriate the budget for the National Foreign Intelligence Program, end quote, brackets, emphasis added, end brackets. The combined effect of these two changes would appear to strengthen OMB's review role. The directive appears to tackle the problem of the weak and ill-timed impact of DCI review. It also puts OMB in the position of evaluating the analyses of and proposals of both the Committee on Foreign Intelligence and the intelligence agencies on the way to the President. The managerial flaws in the President's executive order are these. 1. The President's directive that, quote, neither the Director of Central Intelligence nor the Committee on Foreign Intelligence shall have responsibility for tactical intelligence, end quote, exempts what may be one of the largest and managerially vulnerable areas of intelligence from national management and beneficial trade-offs. It gives defense a dodge that could defeat future DCI and OMB management efforts. By failing to make the distinction between operational control of intelligence organic to military units and management overview, i.e., maintenance of DCI/CFI, database, continuing overview, and occasional initiatives, the President's directive may have undercut much of the Director of Central Intelligence / Office of Management and Budget managerial clout. Footnote 34. Pausing the reading footnote 34. See Congressional Study, Congressional Oversight of the Intelligence Budget, Parts 1 and 2. Resuming the reading. 2. The silence of the executive order on execution of the intelligence budget fails to mandate the CFI and OMB apportionment of funds appropriated for intelligence and GAO audit. The order does give the CFI authority to control, quote, resource allocation, end quote. If this is interpreted to mean a system of centralized Committee on Foreign Intelligence apportionment via Office of Management and Budget executive oversight of national intelligence programs could be strengthened. The meaning of these words in the executive order therefore deserves probing. 3. The actual authority of the DCI in the new Committee on Foreign Intelligence may not be very strong in practice because the executive order does nothing about the pattern of intelligence appropriations. Defense still receives 80% of the national intelligence budget. The order recognizes the Secretary of Defense as responsible for directing, funding, and operating, quote, NSA and national defense and military intelligence and reconnaissance activities as required, end quote. The Secretary of Defense remains the, quote, executive agent of the U.S. government, end quote, for signals intelligence. In view of these formidable DoD powers, the CFI may be dominated by, or at least subject to, the veto of the Department of Defense. End of page 77, beginning page 78. 5. The Director of Central Intelligence. Issues. In January 1946, President Truman established by presidential directive the National Intelligence Authority under the direction of the Director of Central Intelligence, DCI. The directive authorized the Director of Central Intelligence to plan, develop, and coordinate the foreign intelligence activities of the United States government. Footnote 1. Pausing the reading footnote 1. Presidential Directive, January 22nd, 46. Federal Register, Volume 2, page 1337, 1339. Resuming the reading. That same year, the Joint Congressional Committee on the Investigation of the Pearl Harbor Attack described how the military services in Washington had failed to bring all the intelligence together about Japanese plans and intentions, and then concluded that, quote, operational and intelligence work requires centralization of authority and clear-cut allocation of responsibility, end quote. Footnote 2. Pausing the reading, reading footnote 2. Joint Committee on the Investigation of the Pearl Harbor Attack report pursuant to S-Con Res 27, July 20th, 46, 79th Cong, 2nd Sesh, page 254. Resuming the reading. Subsequently, in 1947, Congress passed the National Security Act, giving the DCI responsibility for, quote, coordinating the intelligence activities of the several government departments and agencies in the interest of national security, end quote. Footnote 3. Pausing the reading and reading footnote 3. Section 102, National Security Act of 1947. 61 Statutes at Large. 497-499. Provisions of Section 102 are codified at 50 U.S.C. 403. Resuming the reading. Concurrently, the President designated the Director of Central Intelligence as his principal foreign intelligence advisor and established an Intelligence Advisory Committee, later reconstituted as the United States Intelligence Board, to, quote, advise, end quote, the DCI in carrying out his responsibilities. Footnote 4. Pausing the reading, reading footnote 4. National Security Council Intelligence Directives, NSCID, number 1, December 12, 47. The Intelligence Advisory Committee was chaired by the DCI and was composed of representatives from the Departments of State, Army, Navy, and Air Force, the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and the Atomic Energy Commission. In 1957, the President's Foreign Intelligence Advisory Board recommended that the Intelligence Advisory Committee be merged with the United States Communications Intelligence Board to perform the overall intelligence coordinating function more effectively. Consequently, the United States Intelligence Board, USIB, was established in 1958. Under President Ford's Executive Order Number 11905, February 18, 76, United States Intelligence Board was dissolved, but the Director of Central Intelligence was given the responsibility to, quote, establish such committees of collectors, producers, and users of intelligence to assist in his conduct of his responsibilities, end quote. Resuming the reading. The precise roles and responsibilities of the DCI, however, were not clearly spelled out. For fear of distracting attention from the principal objective of the 1947 National Security Act to unify the armed services, the White House did not delineate the DCI's functions in any detail. Footnote 5. Pausing the reading, reading footnote 5. Draft legislative history of the CIA, prepared by the Office of Legislative Counsel, CIA, July 1976, and Organizational History of CIA, 1950-1953, prepared by the CIA, page 27. Resuming the reading. The congressional debates also failed to address the extent, end of page 78, beginning of page 79, of DCI authority to over the intelligence community. Rather, congressional committees were interested in whether the DCI's primary responsibility would be to the military services, or whether he would report directly to the National Security Council, NSC, and the President. Footnote 6. Pausing the reading footnote 6. Hearings before the Senate Armed Services Committee on S. 758, page 173-176. And hearings before the House Committee on Expenditures in the Executive Departments on H.R. 2139, 1947. During the House hearings, Representative Hale Boggs commented, quote, "I can see, even if this bill becomes law, as presently set up, a great deal of room for confusion on intelligence matters. Here we have the Director of Central Intelligence Agency, responsible to the National Security Council, and yet the Director is not a member of that council. But he has to get all of his information down through the chair of the Secretary of National Defense and all the other agencies of government in addition to our national defense agencies. I just cannot quite see how the man is going to carry out his functions there without a great deal of confusion, and really more opportunity to put the blame on somebody else than there is now." End quote. Secretary of the Navy James Forrestal replied, quote, "Well, if you have an organization, Mr. Boggs, in which men have to rely upon placing the blame, you cannot run any organization. And it goes to the root, really, of this whole question. This thing will work, and I have said from the beginning it would only work if the components want it to work." End quote. Brackets. Emphasis added. And brackets. Resuming the reading. But the problems facing the Director of Central Intelligence were obvious from the beginning. According to a 1948 memorandum by the CIA's General Counsel, in its performance of the intelligence functions outlined in the National Security Act, the primary difficulty experienced by CIA has been in certain weakness of language in paragraph 102D. Concerning the meaning of coordination of intelligence activities, where the Act states, quote, "It shall be the duty of the agency to advise the National Security Council, brackets, and brackets, to make recommendations to the National Security Council for the coordination of such intelligence activities," end quote. It has been strongly argued that this places on the Director a responsibility merely to obtain cooperation among the intelligence agencies. This weakens the this weakness of language and ensuing controversy might have been eliminated by the insertion after the phrase, quote, "It shall be the duty of the agency," end quote. The following words, quote, "and the Director is hereby empowered," end quote, or some other phrase such phrase, indicating the intent of Congress that the Director was to have a controlling voice in the coordination, subject to the direction of the National Security Council. Footnote 7. Pausing the reading footnote 7. Memorandum from Lawrence R. Houston to the Director, May 7th, 48. Resuming the reading. Under Senate Resolution 21, the Select Committee has undertaken, for the first time since 1947, a study of the manner in which the successive directors of Central Intelligence have carried out their responsibilities in an effort to determine 1. Whether the DCI's assigned responsibilities are proper and sufficient. 2. Whether the DCI has sufficient authority to carry out these responsibilities. 3. Whether the DCI should continue as director of the Central Intelligence Agency if he is to play a leadership role for the entire intelligence community. And 4. Whether Congress should enact more explicit or different definitions of the DCI's responsibilities. End of page 79, beginning page 80. Introduction. The Pearl Harbor intelligence failure was the primary motivation for establishing a Director of Central Intelligence. President Truman desired a national intelligence organization which had access to all information and would be headed by a director who could speak authoritatively for the whole community and could ensure that the community's operation served the foreign policy needs of the president and his senior advisors. Footnote 8. Pausing the reading footnote 8. Harry S. Truman, Memoirs, Volume 2, page 58. Resuming the reading. President Truman and subsequent presidents have not wanted to rely exclusively on the intelligence judgments of departments with vested interests in applying intelligence to support a particular foreign policy or to justify acquiring a new weapons system. However, the DCI's responsibility to produce national intelligence and to coordinate intelligence activities has often been at variance with the particular interests and prerogatives of other intelligence community departments and agencies. During the Second World War, this Department of State and the military services developed their own intelligence operations. Despite establishment of the Director of Central Intelligence in 1946, they have not wanted to give up control over their own intelligence capabilities. The military services particularly have argued that they must exercise direct control over peacetime intelligence activities in order to be prepared to conduct wartime military operations. The State and Defense Departments have steadfastly opposed centralized management of the intelligence community under the Director of Central Intelligence. However, over time, the actual degree of conflict between the DCI's responsibility to coordinate intelligence activities and the interests of other parts of the community has depended on how broadly each DCI chose to interpret his coordination responsibilities and how he allocated his time between his three major roles. Footnote 9. Pausing the reading, reading footnote 9. Question. When you were DCI, did you feel that institutionally or functionally your position was bumping heads with the DoD intelligence apparatus in different ways, or not? And if not, why not, in view of the structure? Mr. Schlesinger. Well, historically, there have been intervening periods of open warfare and detente. Prior to these, one of the problems of the intelligence community has been the warfare that exists along jurisdictional boundaries, and this tended to erupt in the period of the 1960s. In particular, when they were introducing a whole set of new technical collection capabilities. That open warfare was succeeded by a period of true detente. But the problem with such detente is that it tends to be based on marriage contracts and the principle of good fences make good neighbors, and that a mutual back scratching and the like, so that you do not get effective resource management under those circumstances. James Schlesinger. Testimony. February 2nd, 76, pages 29 through 30. Resuming the reading. The three roles the DCI plays are 1. The producer of national intelligence, 2. The coordinator of intelligence activities, and 3. The director of Central Intelligence Agency. End of page 80. I'm still on page 80. A. The producer of national intelligence. As the President's principal foreign intelligence advisor, the DCI's major responsibility is to produce objective and independent national. End of page 80. Beginning of page 81. Intelligence for senior policymakers. Footnote 10. Pausing the reading and reading footnote 10. According to NSCID number 1, February 1772, national intelligence is that intelligence required for the formulation of national security policy and concerning more than one department or agency. It is distinguished from departmental intelligence, which is that intelligence in support of the mission of a particular department. Resuming the reading. In doing so, he draws on a variety of collection methods and on the resources of the departmental intelligence organizations, as well as CIA analysts. Footnote 11. Pausing the reading. Reading footnote 11. Prior to President Ford's executive order number 11905, February 1876, the United States Intelligence Board, composed of representatives from the various agencies and departments of the intelligence community, formally reviewed the Director of Central Intelligence's National Intelligence judgments. Resuming the reading. But the DCI issues national intelligence and is alone responsible for its production. Footnote 12. Pausing the reading and reading footnote 12. Under President Ford's Executive Order number 11905, February 1876, the DCI will have responsibility to, quote, supervise production and dissemination of national intelligence, end quote. Resuming the reading. The most important national intelligence which the DCI produces is the National Intelligence Estimate, NIE. An NIE represents the intelligence community's current knowledge of the situation in a particular country or on a specific topic, and then tries to estimate what is going to happen within a certain period of time. National intelligence estimates are prepared for use by those in the highest policy levels of government and represent the considered judgment of the entire community. Footnote 13. Pausing the reading and reading footnote 13. At present, the DCI briefs the Congress on the judgments contained in his National Intelligence Estimates. The Congress does not receive the Director of Central Intelligence's National Intelligence Estimates on a regular basis. Resuming the reading. Major differences of opinion within the intelligence community are illuminated in the text or in the footnotes. When an NIE is released, however, it is the DCI's own national intelligence judgment, in theory free from departmental or agency biases. Footnote 14. Pausing the reading and reading footnote 14. In his role as CIA Director, the Director of Central Intelligence also produces current intelligence and research studies for senior policymakers. These intelligence judgments are prepared by CIA analysts who are supposed to be free from departmental preferences. Such current reporting is not formally reviewed by other members of the intelligence community, but is often informally coordinated. I apologize for my attitude. I'm not upset by this reading. It's a personal thing. That's just a side note, but I will resume the reading now. To carry out this responsibility to produce independent and objective national intelligence, DCI Walter Bedell Smith established the Board of National Estimates in 1950. The board was comprised of senior government officials, academicians, and intelligence officers, and had a small staff known as the Office of National Estimates, ONE. One member of the board would be responsible for supervising the drafting of the estimates by the Office of National Estimates staff. for reviewing these judgments collectively for the Director of Central Intelligence, and for educating disputes within the community. When the United States Intelligence Board reviewed an NIE, the DCI could have confidence in the opinions expressed in the estimate because each estimate reflected the collective judgment of his own board. According to the former chairman of the Board of National Estimates, John Senga, the Board of National Estimates, in fact, functioned as a kind of buffer. It provided procedures by which the departmental views could be given a full and fair hearing, while at the same time ensuring that the DCI's responsibilities to produce intelligence from a national viewpoint could be upheld. Footnote 15. Pausing the reading and reading footnote 15. John Huizenga. Testimony. January 26, 76, page 11. End of page 81, beginning page 82. In 1973, Colby replaced the board and the ONE staff with a new system of 11 National Intelligence Officers, NIOs. Each National Intelligence Officer has staff responsibility to the Director of Central Intelligence for intelligence collection and production activities in his geographical or functional specialty. The NIOs coordinate the drafting of national intelligence estimates within the community. They do not, however, collectively review the final product for the DCI. Footnote 16. Pausing the reading and reading footnote 16. Under the NIO system, the Defense Intelligence Agency, DIA, and the military services have assumed greater responsibility for the initial drafting of military estimates. Because NIOs have no separate staff, they must utilize experts in the community to draft sections of the estimates. In 1975, Defense Intelligence Agency prepared the first drafts of two chapters of the National Intelligence Estimate on Soviet offense and defensive strategic forces. Colby contends that, as a consequence, analysts throughout the community felt more involved. William Colby, testimony, December 11th, 75. Resuming the reading. Director Colby testified that he thought the Board of National Estimates tended to fuzz over differences of opinion and to dilute the Director of Central Intelligence's final intelligence judgments. Footnote 17. Pause the reading, reading footnote 17. According to Colby, quote, "A board? You say, why don't you have a board also? I have some reservation at the ivory tower kind of problem that you get out of a board which is too separated from the rough and tumble of the real world. I think there is a tendency for it to intellectualize and then write sermons and appreciations. Quote, I think there is a tendency to become institutionally committed to an approach and to an appraisal of a situation, and to begin to interpret new events against the light of a predetermined approach toward those events. I think that has been a bother. I like the idea of an individual total responsibility. One man or woman totally responsible. And then you don't get any fuzz about how there was a vote. And therefore, I really didn't like it, but I went along and all that sort of thing. One person totally responsible, I think, is a good way to do it. That can be the director or whatever you set up. But I do like that idea of separating out and making one individual totally responsible so there's nobody else to go to. And there's no way of dumping the responsibility onto somebody else. That really is my main problem with the board, that it diffuses responsibility, that it does get out of the main line of the movement of material. Colby, December 11th, 75, pages 36 through 37. Resuming the reading. In the course of its investigation, the committee concluded that the most critical problem confronting the DCI in carrying out his responsibility to produce national intelligence is making certain that his intelligence judgments are in fact objective and independent of departmental and agency biases. However, this is often quite difficult. A most delicate relationship exists between the DCI and senior policy makers. According to John Huizinga, there is a natural tension between intelligence and policy, and the task of the former is to present as a basis for the decisions of policymakers as realistic as possible a view of forces and conditions in the external environment. Political leaders often find the picture presented less than congenial. Thus, a director of Central Intelligence who does his job well will more often than not be the bearer of bad news, or at least will make things seem disagreeable, complicated, and uncertain. When intelligence people are told, as happened in recent years, that they were expected to get on the team, then a sound intelligence policy relationship has in effect broken down. Footnote 18. Pausing the reading and reading footnote 18. Huizinga, January 26, 76, pages 13 through 14. Resuming the reading. In addition, the Director of Central Intelligence must provide intelligence for cabinet officers who often have vested interests in receiving information which supports a particular foreign policy, State Department, or the acquisition. End of page 82, beginning of page 83. Acquisition of a new weapon system, Department of Defense, footnote 19. Pausing the reading, reading footnote 19. According to Huizinga, quote, it should be recognized that the approach of an operating department to intelligence issues is not invariably disinterested. The Department of State sometimes has an interest in having intelligence take a certain view of a situation because it has a heavy investment in an ongoing line of policy, or because the Secretary has put himself on record as to how to think about a particular problem. In the Department of Defense, intelligence is often seen as the servant of desired policies and programs. At a minimum, there is a strong organizational interest in seeing to it that the intelligence provides a vigorous appraisal of potential threats. It is not unfair to say that because of the military leadership's understandable desire to hedge against the unexpected, to provide capabilities for all conceivable contingencies, there is a natural thrust in military intelligence to maximize threats and to oversimplify the intentions of potential adversaries. It is also quite naturally true that military professionals tend to see military power as the prime determinant of the behavior of states and of the movement of events in international politics. End quote. Hui Zhenge, January 26, 76, pages 11 through 12. Resuming the reading. The President and National Security Council staff want confirmation that their policies are succeeding. Moreover, each national intelligence estimate has in the past been formally reviewed by other members of the intelligence community. Although CIA analysts have developed expertise on issues of critical importance to national policymakers, such as Soviet strategic programs, most directors of Central Intelligence have been reluctant to engage in a confrontation with members of the United States Intelligence Board over substantive findings in national intelligence documents. Footnote 20. Pausing the reading and reading footnote 20. IBID, page 11. Resuming the reading. According to John Hui Zhenge, the truth is that the DCI, since his authority over the intelligence process is at least ambiguous and has an uphill struggle to make a sophisticated appreciation of a certain range of issues prevail in the national intelligence product over against the parochial views and interests of departments and especially the military departments. Footnote 21. Pausing the reading, reading footnote 21. IBID, page 12. Resuming the reading. Finally, the Director of Central Intelligence's own analysts in CIA are sometimes accused of holding an, quote, institutional, end quote, bias. According to James Schlesinger, the Intelligence Directorate of the CIA has the most competent, qualified people in it, just in terms of their raw intellectual capabilities. But this does not mean that they are free from error. In fact, the Intelligence Directorate tends to make a particular type of error systematically in that the Intelligence Directorate tends to be in close harmony with the prevailing biases in the intellectual community. In the university community, as the prevailing view changes in that community, it affects the output of the Intelligence Directorate. Footnote 22. Pausing the reading and reading footnote 22. Schlesinger, February 2nd, 76, pages 24 through 25. Resuming the reading. In particular, CIA analysts are sometimes viewed as being predisposed to provide intelligence support for the preferences of the arms control community. According to Schlesinger, for many years it was said, for example, that the Air Force had an institutional bias to raise the level of the Soviet threat, and one can argue that in many cases that it did, and that was a consequence. End of page 83. Beginning page 84. And I will stop here for today's recording.